You weren't planning to hear this right now, and that's exactly why it matters. Out of all the content you could have scrolled past, something made you stop here, even if you don't fully understand why yet. That pause wasn't random. There are moments in life where things begin to align quietly, without any obvious signal, and the only way you notice them is through a subtle pull you can't explain. This is one of those moments. You may have been going through your days feeling like things are repeating, like certain situations keep circling back, like you're close to understanding something, but it never fully becomes clear. And after a while, it starts to feel like coincidence, like just another part of life that doesn't have a deeper meaning. But what if it's not coincidence at all? What if there is a pattern forming, something guiding you toward a realization you haven't fully seen yet? Because the truth is, not every moment announces its importance when it arrives. Some moments appear quietly, disguised as something ordinary, until you begin to connect the pieces. And right now, something is beginning to connect. Not in a way that demands your attention forcefully, but in a way that invites you to notice. And if you stay with this just a little longer, you're going to start seeing things differently. Not because anything suddenly changes around you, but because you finally begin to understand what has been there all along. If you slow down and really look at your life over the past period of time, you'll start to notice something that didn't seem obvious before. Certain situations didn't just happen once. They repeated in slightly different ways. Different people, different environments, but the same feeling, the same kind of outcome, the same questions left behind. At first, it's easy to ignore that. You tell yourself it's just how life works, that things don't always go as planned, that sometimes you just have to move on without understanding everything. But when something repeats enough times, it stops being random. It becomes a pattern. And patterns are never meaningless. There were moments where you felt like you were getting close to something, like you were about to break through or finally understand what was going on. But then something would shift, something would pull back, or something would end just before it fully made sense. And that created a kind of confusion that's hard to explain. Not a loud confusion, but a quiet one that stays in the back of your mind. You may have asked yourself why the same type of situation keeps appearing, why the same kind of emotional experience keeps returning, even when the details are different. And without a clear answer, it starts to feel like coincidence, but it's not coincidence. What you've been experiencing is a pattern that has been trying to get your attention, not in an obvious way, but in a consistent one. Because patterns don't exist to confuse you, they exist to reveal something you haven't fully seen yet. Something about your direction, your choices, your responses, or even the environments you place yourself in. And until that something becomes clear, the pattern continues. Not as a punishment, but as a signal that there is still something unfinished, something that hasn't been fully understood. The reason this wasn't clear before is because you were too close to it. When you are inside a pattern, you experience it moment by moment, not as a whole. You focus on each individual situation, each separate event, without seeing how they connect to each other. And without that connection, everything feels isolated, like unrelated experiences that just happen to feel similar. But now, something is shifting in your awareness. You're starting to step back just enough to see the bigger picture. You're beginning to notice that these moments were not separate at all. They were connected in a way that is only becoming clear now. And this is where things start to change. Because once you begin to recognize a pattern, it loses its power to repeat unconsciously. You stop reacting the same way. You stop approaching situations without awareness, and you start seeing things before they fully unfold. That's when the cycle begins to break. Not because the world around you suddenly changes, but because your understanding changes. And that shift in understanding is what leads you out of repetition and into something new. So what you've been experiencing was never random. It was consistent for a reason. And now that you are beginning to see it differently, You are moving closer to understanding what it was all leading toward. What you didn't realize while all of this was happening is that something was quietly guiding you through each of those moments, even the ones that felt confusing or unfinished. None of those situations existed on their own. They were connected, not just by similarity, but by direction. Each experience was moving you closer to a point where things would finally begin to make sense, even if that meaning wasn't visible at the time. And the reason it had to unfold this way is because understanding doesn't come all at once. It builds gradually, through repeated exposure, through subtle realization, through moments that seem small until they begin to connect. There were decisions you made without fully knowing why, moments where you felt pulled in a certain direction even when it didn't seem logical. There were also delays, situations that didn't work out, paths that closed just as you thought they might open. At the time, those moments may have felt frustrating or even disappointing. You may have wondered why things didn't move forward the way you expected, or why something that felt promising suddenly shifted. But what you couldn't see then was that those moments were redirecting you, not randomly but intentionally. Each delay prevented you from moving too far in the wrong direction. Each shift adjusted your path slightly, bringing you closer to something more aligned. Even the people you encountered played a role in this process. Some came into your life briefly, some stayed longer, but all of them reflected something back to you. Sometimes it was clarity, sometimes it was confusion, sometimes it was a feeling you couldn't fully explain. But each interaction added another piece to the pattern that was forming. And without realizing it, you were responding, learning, adjusting, even when you thought you were just going through normal experiences. The reason all of this remained unclear until now is because it wasn't meant to be fully understood while it was still unfolding. If you had seen the full picture too early, you might have tried to control it, to force certain outcomes, or to avoid situations that were actually necessary for your growth. But because it stayed hidden, you moved through it naturally. You made choices based on what you felt in the moment, not based on a complete understanding of where it would lead. And that allowed the process to remain authentic. Now, as you begin to look back, something starts to connect. The moments that once felt unrelated begin to form a sequence. The experiences that felt confusing begin to carry meaning. You start to see that there was a direction all along, even if it didn't feel clear while you were in it. And this realization doesn't come all at once. It builds, just like everything else has. But once it starts, it changes the way you see everything moving forward, because now you understand that what felt random was actually part of a path. What felt like coincidence was actually alignment happening quietly. And what felt like delay or confusion was often redirection towards something you couldn't yet see. And this awareness is what brings you to the point you are in right now, where things are no longer just happening around you. They are beginning to make sense in a way they never did before. Now this is the point where everything begins to shift from confusion into clarity, and you need to pay attention to this part because this is where the meaning starts to reveal itself in real time. Up until now, everything felt like pieces that didn't fully connect, like experiences that came and went without a clear conclusion. But what's about to happen is different. The same situations that once left you questioning will begin to show you exactly what they were trying to teach you. And this doesn't happen through one big moment. It happens through a series of small realizations that suddenly feel obvious when you see them. You may start noticing that certain patterns don't affect you the same way anymore. Situations that once pulled you in emotionally now feel clearer, easier to understand, almost predictable. That's because your awareness has changed. You are no longer reacting from the same place you were before. You're seeing things as they are, not just as they feel in the moment. And that shift is what allows the truth to come forward. Because when your perspective changes, the same situation reveals a completely different meaning. There may also be moments where something finally makes sense that didn't before. A past conversation, a decision you made, or even a situation that ended unexpectedly may suddenly feel clear. Not because anything about it changed, but because you now understand it from a different level. And that understanding removes the confusion that once surrounded it. It replaces questions with clarity, and it allows you to move forward without carrying the same uncertainty. What's important here is that this clarity is not random. It is happening because you have reached a point where you are ready to see it. There are things you couldn't have understood earlier, not because you weren't capable, but because the timing wasn't right. Understanding requires distance, growth, and a shift in awareness. And now that those pieces are in place, everything begins to connect in a way that feels natural instead of forced. You may also notice that as this clarity increases, your decisions start to feel more certain. You're no longer second-guessing every step or overthinking every outcome. There is a quiet confidence that begins to replace the doubt you once felt. Not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you trust what you're seeing and understanding now. And that trust allows you to move forward without needing constant confirmation. This is the moment where coincidence no longer feels like coincidence, where things that once seemed random start to show a pattern you can't ignore. And once you see that pattern clearly, you realize that what's happening now is not accidental. It's the result of everything that has been leading you here. And now this is where everything comes together in a way that no longer feels uncertain. Because once you begin to see the pattern clearly, you can't go back to seeing things the way you did before. The confusion that once made you question everything starts to lose its hold, and in its place comes a sense of understanding that feels steady and real. Not overwhelming, not forced, but something that settles naturally within you. You start to recognize that what you experienced was never random, and more importantly, it was never meaningless. Every situation, every delay, every repeated moment carried a purpose that is only now becoming visible because you are finally in the position to understand it. This is also the point where your focus begins to shift forward instead of staying tied to the past. Before, you may have been looking back, trying to figure out what happened, trying to make sense of things that didn't fully connect. But now, you don't need to search for answers in the same way, because the clarity you've gained has already given you what you were looking for. And with that clarity comes a new level of awareness, one that changes how you approach everything moving forward. You begin to notice things earlier, you recognize patterns faster, and you trust your understanding more than you did before. What matters now is how you carry this awareness into what comes next. Because this is not just about understanding the past, it's about changing the way you move in the present. You are no longer reacting blindly or repeating the same cycles without realizing it. You are aware, and that awareness becomes your guide. It helps you make decisions that feel more aligned. It helps you step away from situations that don't feel right sooner. And it allows you to move toward what actually supports your growth, instead of what only feels familiar. There is also a sense of timing that becomes clearer now. You begin to understand that not everything is meant to happen immediately, and not everything is meant to last forever. Some things are temporary by design, and some delays are necessary for alignment. And once you accept that, you stop forcing outcomes or questioning every pause. You start to trust that what is meant to happen will unfold when the conditions are right, just as everything that led you here did. And this is why this message reached you now, not earlier and not later. Because this is the moment where understanding meets readiness. You are no longer in the phase of questioning everything without answers. You are in the phase of seeing clearly enough to move differently. And that shift, even if it feels subtle, changes everything. Because once you move with awareness instead of uncertainty, the experiences that come into your life begin to reflect that change. So what happens next is not something you need to fear or overthink. It's something you are prepared for, even if you don't realize it yet. The same way everything aligned to bring you to this understanding, what comes next, will align in a way that continues to guide you forward. And this time, you will be able to see it, recognize it, and respond to it without the confusion that once held you back.